Good afternoon. I have been asked by a few of you to talk about the difference between core competencies and skills, and specific to how do we actually develop skills, and how do we develop core competencies, and how do we develop them differently. So we use core competencies in our enterprises as a way of selecting whether or not we want to hire somebody, whether or not we want to put somebody into a different position. And we differentiate between core competencies and skills really, really clearly. You may have heard years ago, something like hire for attitude and train for skill. Attitude's kind of a sloppy word, but it points in the direction of core competencies. So we actually want to hire people who have specific sets of core competencies that are actually going to fit whatever kind of position we're in. So how do we do that? Well, we'll start by talking with one another about what are the core competencies that we need in a position. And we probably list 4, 5, 6 of them. And then we say, what are the behaviors that go with those core competencies? And then we'll add skills to that afterwards. Here's an example right out of the gate of the difference between a core competency and a skill. A core competency would be something like velocity of work. How quickly someone gets an idea and turns it into action. It has to do with maybe physical and mental energy as well. So velocity of work, how quickly people work, that's a core competency. Time management is a skill. And core competency, another example of a core competency would be curiosity, genuine, respectful curiosity. People who really want to get at why and how things work and what they might be missing, that sort of thing. That is a core competency. Curiosity is a core competency. Knowing how to research something to get to the source is a skill. Anyone can learn it. Skills are specific to situations. We use the skill of research when it's needed. We don't use it all the time. Core competencies, however, show up all over the place. If I've got the core competency of curiosity, then I'm always curious. I'm curious at a family reunion. I am curious when I'm shopping for cars. I'm curious when I'm at work. I'm curious when I'm watching a movie on TV and wonder why on earth did that car, was it black when it turned the corner and blue when it turned the next corner? That sort of thing. Okay, so curiosity shows up everywhere. Core competencies show up everywhere. Now, it's long been thought that core competencies develop very, very slowly and that that's the only way they can develop, and that skills develop more quickly. And they might be slow, but they generally develop more quickly. That's actually not the case. Let's take apart a little bit how core competencies are actually specifically developed. So let's imagine that you want a core competency of any type. Let's pick one like velocity of work. If you want to develop a core competency around velocity of work, how quickly do you get at work and get it done? And so that shows up everywhere. We want to be able to understand that core competencies like that one are made up of a whole bunch of different skills. So phase one, or step one actually. So step one in core competency development is to realize that it's like a Lego castle that's made up of a bunch of different Lego pieces. Step one, take apart the Lego castle. Take apart the core competency and look at what are the skills that someone with that specific core competency, what are the skills that they demonstrate? You got to start by understanding what those fundamental skills are. Identify those and then pick them one at a time and practice that specific skill until you can do it without having to think about it. You don't have to be a phenomenal expert at it, but do it until you can do it without having to think about it. As soon as you can get that skill done, practiced without having to think about it, pick the second skill and do that at the same time you're doing the first skill until you can do it without having to think about it. Do it again with the third skill. It's likely that in any core competency there are 3 or 4 fundamental skills that are observable. You can watch someone do them. Pick those 3 or 4, practice one, add the second till you don't have to think about it, add the third till you don't have to think about it. Now you got 3 going at once, add the fourth if there is one, then do them all till you don't have to think about it. This can happen in a very short period of time if you practice what Erickson calls deliberate practice. You're focusing on it, you're doing it over and over and over and over, getting muscle memory, getting new micro pathways wired in your brain. Do it over and over and over and over until you go, there, and I can practice all 4 of those skills at the same time. Quick story, learning to fly an airplane. There's a bunch of skills that I'm learning in how to fly the airplane. I have not developed the competency of flying an airplane yet, but I've developed several skills, core skills. I practice one skill over and over and over and over and over until I can do it without thinking about it. And then I added a second skill and a third and a fourth, and I've probably got a dozen skills now that are all stuck together in a fairly short period of time. I have not yet developed a competency, but I've developed the ability to have all of those things happening at the same time. Simple idea, walking and chewing bubble gum, okay? You're doing both at the same time, and you're probably not thinking about either of them while you're doing them. You're thinking about something else. All right, so that's one. Identify what a core competency is, study somebody who's got it, and figure out what the 3 or 4 fundamental skills are that they have. Practice one, add a second, add a third, add a fourth. When you get to that place where you've got those 4 skills in place, you don't have the competency yet, take a pause and reflect. Pause and reflect. What have I learned and how have I learned it? At this point, that's step 2, pause and reflect. At this point, add a mentor. Add somebody who has those core competencies to your pause and reflect. Stop and think and talk with that person about how they do it. Now they're going to watch you, they're going to talk with you about how they do it, and they're going to shed some light on some things you didn't even know existed. They're going to shed light on how they think about why they use that skill here and not there, why they use these skills in different orders, why they do the reverse of that skill in another situation. So it's really important that after I've identified the core competency, practice the fundamental skills, that I engage with a mentor. This is a person who is so much better at this competency than I could ever imagine being, that the more time I spend around them, reflecting with them, and invite them into my life so they can watch me practice these skills, the more quickly I will be able to build the actual core competency. All right? So that's where we are so far. We've identified the core competency. We've taken it apart in the basic Lego blocks of it so we can see what the 4 or 3 basic fundamental skills are and practice those skills till we can practice them all at once. We've paused and invited a mentor in to watch us when we've done that and to give us direct feedback about what we are missing. Those 3 steps are the main parts that we need to do to develop it. When we engage the mentor and then we start practicing with the mentor, every time we do, after we practice those skills with the mentor right there with us, we need to actually pause and reflect out loud with that mentor again. Every time we do that, the mentor will add another characteristic or another perspective to the development of our core competency. Now, we have still not yet developed the core competency. This might have taken us 2 months. It might have taken us 6 months. It might have taken us 18 months. Depends on how often you can be around that mentor. Being around the mentor while you're practicing is the key to developing core competencies and pausing and reflecting. Unbelievably important stuff to do. Then after that happens and I'm able to practice that skill in that environment, I need to practice that skill those skills in a slightly different environment. Maybe 10 to 20% different. That next environment needs to be different enough that I have to see how those 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 fundamental skills apply in that different environment. Not a totally different environment, just a slightly different environment. Then the next time, a slightly different environment again. Imagining that you're pausing and reflecting, getting some coaching from your mentor in between each one of these experiences. Each experience that I have that's slightly different than the previous one, if I pause and reflect between them, will add together to build the fundamentals and then to build my core competency. The more quickly I can have those experiences, each one slightly different than the last, the more quickly I'm able to build core competencies. If you have a fundamental skill set of public speaking, and you want to get really good at connecting with people, and you want to develop a competency around reading audiences, getting them to connect with you so that they really understand the content, and then they're able to call to action from that content, or you're able to call them to action from that content. You want that core competency as a part of how you function. Then you need to be able to practice it in a specific setting. Pause and reflect with your mentor. practice it in a next setting quickly, the next few days if you can, that is slightly different, 10 to 20% different than that first setting, and then do it again and again and again and again and again. Imagine every time you practice it, you're spiraling out further and further away from the original experience. When we do that further and further and further away, as long as we pause and reflect with the mentor in between those experiences, we will accelerate the development of core competencies. Because here's the kicker, competencies really are about the relationship between the skills applied in different settings. So that's why I want to get those 3 or 4 skills and then practice them here and here and here and here and here in a whole bunch of different settings. The faster I can do that with the help of a mentor, the more quickly I'm going to be able to develop those core competencies. It's really, really cool. One more final thought before we get to the end of our conversation here. If you are a person who likes to spend all of your time doing things you're very, very good at, and you get a lot of accolades for that, people praise you for doing things you're good at, if you like being the expert, you'll probably not quickly develop additional core competencies. Because you'll notice in each one of these settings where I'm spiraling out, where I'm experiencing with the mentor more and more and more, I'm pushing myself, or my mentor is inviting me to be pushed to the next experience that makes me uncomfortable. People who develop core competencies quickly and additional core competencies are perpetually uncomfortable. We are people who are in situations where we keep track of how we're stretching and growing, not keep track of how comfortable we are. Therefore, we have to be willing to be embarrassed. We have to be willing to be wrong. We have to be willing to be in a new situation where the stuff that I practiced yesterday isn't exactly the same thing, and I didn't get quite the reward out of it. We're always pushing the envelope, so to speak, taking with us what we learned, putting it into a new setting where we're now not as good. Again, if you have to be the person who, when you walk in the room, people think of you as the very best and you like that feeling a lot, you'll probably stay with the core competencies you've got right now. But if you're okay not being the smartest person in the room, not being the most coordinated, the most artistic, the most well-spoken, the most well-dressed, the most well-thought of, if you're okay being the person who's the novice in a situation, perpetually, you're going to accelerate the development of your core competencies. So it takes somebody who is, in Lencioni's words, hungry, humble, and smart, all 3 put together in order to develop or accelerate the development of core competencies. So that's what it's all about. Remember, core competencies are how a whole bunch of skills all work together, and they tend that core competency shows up in a whole bunch of different environments. And it can be accelerated if the experience around it is accelerated, sandwiched with a mentor and pause and reflect. That's how you develop core competencies. Pretty cool. Donnie, what'd I miss? Anything?
Not much.
Not much?
Yeah, I think you got everything.
Got it all? That made sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So, there you go. There was 13 minutes of your life you're never going to get back.